Now that we've seen how a critical edition works, we're going to see how the TEI proposes to encode this type of document. The TEI has three different options to encode critical editions, critical apparatus. The first option is the location reference method. The second is the double endpoint attached method, and the third is the parallel segmentation method. I recommend that you check the guidelines where each of these methods is explained very thoroughly. But here we're going to see just a little example to begin with of each method, but then we are going to work only with the parallel segmentation method, because it is the easiest to implement by hand. If you do not have any special software, it is manageable and has reasonable advantages. So let's see some examples. I'm presenting you again the example we saw in the previous module with the manuscripts A, B, and C and their differences. So here you have the simple error in manuscript B, right? We would represent that like this in a print critical edition. And here is how we would encode this phenomenon with the location reference method. In the location reference method, you have an apparatus entry, which is attached merely to a chunk of the text, to a unit of the text, not a precise point in the text. That is, you would have the sentence in the main text. You would have the sentence appearing in a particular paragraph, and somewhere else in the text, you would have an apparatus entry marked up with the app element here. And attached to this paragraph where it occurs with the lock attribute. Within this app element, you would have a lem for lemma, containing the word that's changing in manuscript B, and you would have one or more readings encoded with the RDG element, and attached to one or more witness with the attribute wit for witness. So here you have no way of knowing where exactly in paragraph 1 this variant occurs. So it's a method that's useful to generate notes, but not much more than that. So it might be relevant when you're doing, mass digitization of old editions, but if you're doing a digital scholarly edition, it might not be the method of choice. Another interesting method is the double endpoint attached method. So in this case, with the same example, it's a bit more complicated because you have the same principle with an apparatus entry, app element. But this time you will mark up the beginning of the phenomenon and the end of the phenomenon with anchor elements, which are empty tags. That is, they are not wrapping up some text, they are just marking a point in the text. So you mark the point just before the lemma, just before l'enianto, and just after it. And you give an ID, a unique ID, with the XML ID attribute, to each of these anchor, the beginning and ending of the lemma. And then somewhere in the text, you're going to have your apparatus entry, saying that it runs from the first anchor to the second anchor, from app 1b to app 1e here, and giving the alternative reading of manuscript B here, with the same tag as before, so RDG for reading element, with the witness attribute, wit, and the word offered by B at this place. So the advantage of this method is that it deals very well with, potentially overlapping hierarchies. So if you have a lot of apparatus entries in your edition, it's very efficient to deal with this issue. But the drawback of this method is that it's quite complicated to encode it by hand unless you have some kind of specialized software, because you have to put in place each anchor and give it an XML ID and not make any mistake when you attach the apparatus to the right ID and so on. So most of the time people use the parallel segmentation method. In this case, the apparatus element occurs not somewhere in the text or even out of the text, but inline. That is, just right at a place where the witnesses have different readings, you will have the apparatus entry. Here, for instance, just after corporis, you will have the apparatus entry containing lemma with leniantur, the word that we want to see in the main text, and a reading, RDG element with laniantur, the reading of manuscript D, attached to manuscript D with the width attribute. So let's see other examples, but just with the parallel segmentation method this time, on how to deal with omissions, for instance. So here, same example as we saw in the previous module. This time, let's say that manuscript B has omitted the word dolores, and we are going to represent that like this in a traditional print apparatus. And here is how you would encode this in a parallel segmentation method. So at the place where the omission occurs, where there's a difference between a disagreement between the manuscripts, you put the apparatus element with the lem element for the lemma and a reading element here for the omission. Still, you connect this reading with B through the width attribute. You have a optional cause attribute that you can use. Here it's an omission. The cause of the difference is an omission. And the content of RDG is nothing. It's just empty, because if it's an omission, there's no text there in the manuscript. Simple as that. Another example, an addition. So here, let's say that manuscript B adds et mentis just after corporis. So this is how you'd represent that in a print apparatus. And this is how you would represent that in TEI. So this time it is the lemma that is empty, and the reading for B, which contains something where the lemma has nothing, which is the case for additions. With that, we've covered the main principle of encoding critical additions in TEI. In the next module, we are going to pay a little bit more attention to what kind of apparatus you can have in an edition and the advantages of each of them. Thank you.